The Pathless is an action-adventure game brought to you by the team responsible for Abzu and some developers from Journey. In the same vein as those two games, The Pathless has a heavier focus on the visuals and music and more of a laid-back approach to story and gameplay. That being said, The Pathless makes some clear improvements over Abzu and actually has some noteworthy gameplay additions, making it a solid choice for anyone looking for a relaxing game experience. So, the story of The Pathless follows a very similar structure to that of many other fantasy games. The light is fading from the land, and it's your job to remove the darkness and restore the world to its original glory. It's very simple and straightforward, and it's something that we've seen many times before. And while it's not bad or anything, it is very clear that the intent was not to have a super deep or intricate story, and instead tell a simple tale and let the art do the heavy lifting. That being said, the game does have this form of final memories scattered throughout the world, and I actually did find those relatively interesting. They're nothing special, but they were certainly enough to keep me reading, and I liked seeing people's final reflections on their life and death, and I think it struck a good melancholy tone. I also enjoyed the embodiment of the gods in animal form, and the writings of them were very clearly inspired by real-world ancient myths. There's also some brief voice acting found in the game, and while I have no idea what language they were speaking, the tone and emotion in their voice was very clear, and I think it sounded very good. Overall though, the story aspect of The Pathless is very simple, and there's not much to talk about here, but I think it works well enough for what it is, and it contains a solid melancholy tone throughout its runtime. As far as gameplay goes, I would describe The Pathless as a momentum-based puzzle game, and I would break it up into 3 different sections of gameplay: traversal, puzzle solving, and boss fights. First of those 3, the traversal in this game is based entirely around momentum and how you use your bow and arrow to gain speed from shooting targets. It does auto-aim, and it's pretty simple, but the goal of this is more to learn how to do it fluidly so you can effortlessly fly across the environment. It's a very basic gameplay loop, but I found it pretty relaxing and entertaining to correctly time my shots, jumps, and glides to gain maximum speed or height. I started off being really slow and inefficient with my movement, but by the end of the game I could glide through the environment with ease. The game also features a decently sized open world that is broken off into 4 different regions. Within these regions, the game allows you to explore freely, and you can search for secrets or solve the scattered puzzles in any order you like. And speaking of that, now's a good time to segue into the puzzle aspect of the game, which I think is really good. They aren't super difficult or anything, but they certainly have some complexity to them, and I found them to be very enjoyable. Now, the game basically has 2 kinds of puzzles, the gems and the keys, and I would compare them to the Korok seeds in Breath of the Wild and the moons in Super Mario Odyssey, respectively. Much like the Korok seeds, the gems are plentiful and found in tons of miscellaneous spots. Sometimes you have to stand in place of a statue, sometimes you have to do a mini speed trial, sometimes there's a hidden chest or a series of lanterns to be lit. These are very simple, but like the Korok seeds, their simplicity and the plentiful nature work well together, and it was always fun to just spot something that looked a little out of place and then figure out, hey, it's actually a gem puzzle. It leads to a simple but constant feeling of engagement as you are always doing small tasks to work towards leveling up your flight ability. The keys, on the other hand, are more substantial and are required for progression, similar to the moons in Odyssey. These puzzles usually revolve around moving targets to shoot through, moving mirrors to direct bounce shots, guiding your eagle to place weights on the platforms, and shooting through torches to light others, oftentimes combining all 4 of these into one puzzle. They aren't really going to rack your brain or anything, but they will certainly force you to take a second to analyze the situation and look around for possible solutions before putting the pieces together. I also particularly like the, what I would call, puzzle rooms that you can come across. They are less frequent, but they kind of act as their own mini puzzle dungeon, as they are full-on buildings that you have to enter to solve a series of puzzles to gain a big boost of gems. These tended to be the most intricate puzzles in the game, as the whole area was all connected to the puzzle in some way. Because of this, I definitely found these to be the most enjoyable, and I would have liked to see even more, but I was happy with what we got. And that brings us to the big standout of the gameplay, the boss fights. Now, much like the rest of the game, these aren't very hard, but they look so damn cool. It's clear the focus here is to create a really enjoyable spectacle and less of a challenging affair, and I think they succeeded because these fights just look sick and were a ton of fun to play through. My only issue with them would be the fact that certain parts can feel a bit repetitive. I think overall they do a really good job of making each boss feel like its own unique moment, but there are definitely certain reused elements that are a bit harder for them to hide. Despite that, I think playing through them was still a very enjoyable experience. There is one major complaint that I do have with the gameplay, however, and it would be the inclusion of these weird stealth sections that appear a few times throughout the game. These can happen anytime you venture into the traveling red orb on the map, and while I found it very easy to avoid the orb, the game does force you into it once per area, so you're going to be doing these stealth sections at least 4 times. The problem I have with these is that they just feel really out of place and a bit random. They're very bare bones and don't use any of the mechanics from the rest of the game, so it feels like something that probably just could have been cut. The idea is that you have to move in the dark and then freeze when you're in the light, but it just feels rough, and I had some questionable moments like this, where I was safe here, but then insta-failed over here. Despite that complaint, however, I think that the overall gameplay is pretty good. It's simple, but I still found it just enjoyable, especially with the great visuals and music. So, the Pathless sports a very nice low-poly art style with lots of vibrant colors used throughout. The world itself is a nice mix of lush forests, sprawling plains, towering mountains, and shimmering lakes, all filled with the remnants of a civilization lost to the darkness. For me personally though, one of the standouts here is the architecture and ruins you can find throughout the world. One of my fears at the start of the game was that I might end up seeing the same buildings over and over, but surprisingly, the game does a really good job of mixing up the design. You will certainly see some repeated textures and objects here and there, but the ruins themselves are very noticeably different throughout each part of the land, so much so that I can still actively recall several different places that I visited along my journey. This was really important to my engagement with the world, and I think this detail is certainly worth mentioning as it made it much more interesting to explore. The music is also great and does a fantastic job setting the tone for the adventure. The melancholy strings really fit the state of the world, the curious melodies and plucks do a good job keeping a sense of mystery during the puzzles, and the Mongolian throat singing is always great. And overall, as predicted, these guys once again deliver on the art and design front, and for me, the joy of roaming the world and listening to the music certainly meshed well with the simple game mechanics. So yeah guys, I really enjoyed this game. I don't think it's going to be for everyone, and if you're looking for something a bit more intensive in the gameplay department, I can totally see why you might want to skip this, but I would still definitely recommend this game as I found it to be just a fun and entertaining experience. I've been playing a lot of Call of Duty recently, and while I'm having some fun with that game, it's also been a bit stressful because I've been having to sweat my ass off due to the skill-based matchmaking, so the Pathless kind of came at a really good time for me where I definitely needed to play something more low-key for a bit. If you're also in the mood for a good laid-back artistic experience, then the Pathless is a great pick that I would highly recommend despite a few shortcomings. Alright guys, thanks for watching. Let me know what you think of the game in the comments below. Be sure to check out the trailer and Steam page for my own indie game coming out soon. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video.